The house was quiet, the kind of silence that settles in the middle of a heat wave, when even the air seems too exhausted to move. It was one of those days where the walls felt like they were closing in, every room stuffy and suffocating. I could feel the weight of the day pressing down on me, a simmering irritation that I couldn't quite shake. A few beads of sweat started to form on my forehead as I made my way to the pool out back. I grabbed a towel, slung it over my shoulder, and took my phone out of my pocket, tossing it on the bed without much thought. The last thing I wanted was to be tied to the buzzing notifications and messages. I figured I'd just be a few minutes, some laps, a quick cool-off, then back inside, maybe coax my girlfriend out for a swim too, if she wasn't busy. I'd been trying to get her to spend more time together, to recapture a bit of that spark that had felt so natural at the beginning. It had been a long time since we'd done something as simple as relax together by the pool, laughing over drinks or just lounging in the sun. As I slid the glass door open, a gust of warm air hit me. Even outside, the heat felt heavy, thick like syrup, clinging to my skin. The pool, though, just the sight of it, that cool blue water gleaming under the sunlight, looked like an oasis. I walked to the edge, closed my eyes for a moment, and let myself sink into the moment, letting everything else slip away as I dove in. The water hit me like an electric shock, jolting me back into my own body. I felt the chill spread, numbing every nerve as I slipped beneath the surface, then came up gasping, wiping the water from my face. There was something soothing about being underwater, where everything went quiet, every worry muffled and distant. I took my time, doing a few laps, letting the rhythm of my strokes take over, feeling the stress of the past few weeks start to melt away. I paused, resting my arms on the edge of the pool, catching my breath. The water felt perfect, cool, and refreshing, wrapping around me like a balm. I closed my eyes again, letting my mind wander, thinking about the past few weeks, the strange tension that had crept into our lives. Little things had started to feel off. My girlfriend had been distant lately, her laughter quieter, her smile harder to come by. I'd told myself it was just the usual ups and downs, the things everyone goes through. I figured it was nothing worth worrying about, or maybe, deep down, I just didn't want to face what I was starting to feel. I tried to shake it off, leaning back into the water and floating for a while. I could hear the faint sounds of the neighborhood, a lawnmower buzzing somewhere down the street, kids laughing, the faint hum of cars passing by on the main road. I let myself drift, staring up at the sky, watching a single cloud make its lazy way across the blue. For a few moments, it felt like I was miles away from everything. I didn't know it at the time, but that moment in the water would be the last bit of peace I'd get that day. I flipped over, swimming back toward the edge, and noticed movement through the glass doors of the house. It was the maid, carrying a stack of clean towels up the stairs. She nodded politely when she noticed me, giving me a slight, almost knowing smile, before she turned away, disappearing up the stairs to the bedroom. I didn't think much of it. She was polite, reserved, the kind of person you trusted to do her job and keep out of your business. I had to admit, though, that I'd noticed a change in her demeanor too, a sort of ease and comfort that wasn't there when she'd first started working for us. She'd been with us for a while, but lately I'd noticed her lingering just a little longer when she walked through the house, her gaze sometimes lingering on my girlfriend, in ways that I didn't fully understand. I told myself I was being paranoid, letting my imagination get the best of me, but even as I tried to brush it off, I felt a strange unease gnawing at the back of my mind. I leaned back into the water, trying to sink back into the calm, to let the ripples erase the lingering doubt. After another 15 minutes, I decided to call it. I climbed out of the pool, grabbing my towel and drying off as I headed back inside. The house was just as quiet as I'd left it, the only sound a faint murmur drifting down from upstairs. I frowned, straining to make out the sound. It was faint, but unmistakable, laughter, soft and intimate, coming from the bedroom, My girlfriend's laugh. I wrapped the towel around my neck, hesitating for a moment. Maybe she was on the phone, catching up with a friend, or watching a funny video. But something about the sound was different. A softness I hadn't heard in a while. I felt my pulse quicken, a faint prickling at the back of my neck, like my body was trying to tell me something my mind hadn't caught up with yet. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the feeling, telling myself I was overreacting. But as I climbed the stairs, the laughter grew clearer, interspersed with another voice, lower and unfamiliar. I recognized it after a second. It was the maid. The sound was warm, a little too familiar, like they shared a joke only they understood. I reached the top of the stairs, each step feeling heavier, as if some invisible weight was pressing down on me. I felt the hollow ache in my chest grow with each step, a growing certainty that I was about to see something I didn't want to see. The door to the bedroom was slightly open, the laughter softer now, mixed with quiet whispers. My hand hovered over the door handle for a moment, the air around me suddenly thick, charged with a tension I could almost taste. I pushed the door open, slowly, letting it swing inward with a quiet creak. And there, lying in the middle of our bed, tangled together in a way that left no room for misunderstanding, were my girlfriend and the maid. My girlfriend's hand was resting on the maid's shoulder, her fingertips tracing gentle circles on her skin. They looked up at each other, sharing a private smile, their laughter soft and intimate, like I was a stranger trespassing on something sacred. They hadn't seen me yet. I stood there, frozen in place, my mind struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. It felt like time had stopped, the world narrowing down to this single, devastating moment. A cold numbness spread through me, a hollow ache that replaced every thought, every feeling. I wanted to look away, to shut the door and walk back down the stairs, pretend I hadn't seen anything, but I couldn't move. The maid looked up first, her eyes widening when she saw me. For a second, she looked like she was about to pull away, to turn and bolt, but she didn't move. She just sat there, her gaze steady, a faint flicker of guilt in her eyes. And then my girlfriend turned, locking eyes with me, her expression unreadable. She didn't look surprised, or even ashamed. She just looked at me, like I was interrupting something I had no right to see. I stood there, silent, the weight of betrayal settling in, pressing down on me with a force that made it hard to breathe. I stood there in the doorway, feeling the blood drain from my face as I tried to piece together what I was seeing. My girlfriend and the maid lay sprawled across the bed, an unmistakable intimacy between them, a kind of closeness I hadn't seen in a long time. She was propped up on her elbow, smiling down at the maid, in a way that twisted something deep inside me, a look I'd once thought was reserved for me alone. Her hand rested on the maid's arm, tracing delicate circles as though she were handling something fragile, precious. There was a softness in her eyes, a tenderness I hadn't seen directed at me in months. I wanted to believe this was some kind of misunderstanding, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But there they were, sharing a quiet, private laugh that no one had let me in on. My stomach twisted. I felt like I was trespassing on my own life, an uninvited guest in the middle of something deeply personal and hidden. The maid's hair was spread out on the pillow, her face relaxed, a faint smile lingering at the corners of her mouth. She looked so at ease, so at home in our bed. For a moment, I wanted to turn around, go back downstairs, and pretend none of this had happened. I wanted to believe I was seeing things, that maybe I'd hit my head in the pool, and this was all some surreal fever dream. But no, the scene before me was all too real. The laughter, the whispers, the softness in their voices. These were things you can't fake, things you can't misinterpret. The maid's gaze flicked to me first, her eyes widening, a momentary look of panic flashing across her face. But to my shock, she didn't pull away or scramble to cover herself like someone caught red-handed. No, she held her position, giving me a look that was almost steady, almost defiant. Her face flushed, but she didn't break eye contact, didn't move to untangle herself from my girlfriend. I half expected her to stumble over an apology, to mumble something about not meaning for this to happen, but no words came. And then my girlfriend turned, her head slowly shifting to meet my gaze. Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I saw something like annoyance flash across her face, like I'd interrupted a moment she'd been savoring. I waited for guilt to fill her eyes, for her face to turn red with embarrassment, for some sign that she realized the magnitude of what she'd done. But what I saw in her expression instead was relief. It was so subtle, I almost missed it, but it was there, a slight, almost imperceptible release, like she'd been waiting for this day, waiting for me to stumble upon her secret, to let the other shoe drop. The room felt too small, too close, like the walls were pressing out in. My hands were shaking, my pulse racing, as 1,000 questions fought to make their way to my lips, each one more painful than the last. I could feel the words building in my throat, but when I opened my mouth, only a single, cracked whisper escaped. Really? The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the faint sounds from outside, the distant hum of a lawnmower, the chirping of birds, the gentle breeze rustling through the trees. Here, inside my own home, everything felt frozen, like I'd stepped out of time, trapped in this surreal, painful tableau. She didn't flinch, she didn't move to cover herself or offer some rushed explanation. She just looked at me with an expression that was unreadable, a mask I'd never seen before. And slowly, to my utter disbelief, her lips curved into a faint, almost smug smile. There was no apology in her eyes, no remorse, no regret, just a quiet confidence, a calm that felt like a slap to the face. It was as if she'd been waiting for me to catch up to her, to figure out that I'd been left behind. The maid, sensing the weight of the moment, finally shifted, sitting up a little, but her gaze stayed low, avoiding mine. She looked like she wanted to disappear, her face a mix of embarrassment and, oddly enough, loyalty. I could see it now. This wasn't a fling for her. She wasn't just a player in some brief, impulsive affair. No, the way she looked at my girlfriend, there was something deeper there, something that made my stomach turn with a fresh wave of nausea. I cleared my throat, struggling to find my voice. I trusted you. The words felt too simple, too small to capture the depth of the betrayal that was tearing through me. My fists clenched at my sides, my nails digging into my palms, but I barely felt the pain. I thought we were okay. My voice cracked, a hint of desperation slipping through, and I hated myself for it. My girlfriend's expression didn't waver. She didn't look away. In fact, she seemed almost bored, like she was indulging me, waiting for me to get this out of my system so she could move on. Her silence was louder than any words, a refusal to explain herself, to offer even a semblance of an apology. She just looked at me, her gaze steady, unflinching. A bitter laugh escaped my lips, sharp and unexpected, echoing in the stillness of the room. So that's it? No explanation? No apology? My voice was rising, the anger spilling over, but she didn't react. She just watched me with that same infuriating calm, a hint of amusement in her eyes, like she was watching a play she'd seen a dozen times before. I took a step back, the reality of the situation sinking in. I gave you everything, I said, my voice low, almost a whisper. I thought you loved me. Finally, a flicker of something crossed her face, annoyance or maybe impatience. She sighed, crossing her arms as she looked at me with a mixture of pity and frustration. "Oh, come on," she said, her tone exasperated, as if I were the one being unreasonable. "Did you really think this was going to last forever?" The words hit me like a punch to the gut, knocking the air out of me. "What?" I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. She rolled her eyes, her expression softening slightly, but not in a way that was comforting. "You always had your head in the clouds," she said, her tone almost affectionate. "You really believed in all that fairy tale nonsense, didn't you? That we'd just, what? Go on like this forever." My hands were trembling, the anger boiling over into something sharp and raw. "I thought we were building something real," I shot back, my voice shaking with a mix of rage and disbelief. "I thought we had a future together. I thought—" She cut me off, a slight smirk tugging at the corners of her lips. "Well, maybe you thought wrong." The words were cold, final, a knife twisting in the wound. I looked at her, searching for any sign that this was a mistake, that she might still care, that there was some piece of her that felt guilty, that wanted to make things right. But all I saw was that same calm, that same unshakable confidence, like she'd already moved on, like she was waiting for me to catch up to the reality she'd accepted long ago. My gaze shifted to the maid, who was still sitting on the bed, her face pale, her eyes darting between us. She looked miserable, but she didn't say anything, didn't try to explain. She was just there, a silent witness to the destruction she'd helped create. I took another step back, feeling like the ground was crumbling beneath me, like I was standing on the edge of a cliff with nowhere to go. The silence between us stretched, thick and suffocating, filling the room with a weight that pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Without another word, I turned and walked out, leaving the bedroom, the house, everything behind me. I found myself pacing downstairs, replaying the scene in my head on a loop I couldn't seem to stop, every detail seared into my mind, the intimacy in their laughter, the ease with which they'd shared that private world. I kept hearing her voice, calm and collected, telling me that maybe I'd been naive, that our future together had been little more than a fantasy in my own mind. But it wasn't just the act that twisted inside me. It was her indifference. She'd looked at me like I was an interruption, like I was asking her to pretend to be someone she wasn't. And that smirk was enough to drive a person mad. I took a breath and clenched my fists. No, this needed to end here. There were too many questions, too many things left unsaid. The anger was building, a low burning ache that I couldn't shake, and the betrayal was eating me from the inside out. I wasn't about to leave it hanging, like a half-finished thought. I was going to have this out. With that resolve, I turned and headed back up the stairs, every step heavier than the last, my heart pounding against my ribs. I felt like a stranger in my own house, in my own life, an intruder in a story I thought I was writing. But no, I was apparently just a footnote, just a character someone else could leave behind whenever they wanted. When I reached the top of the stairs, I saw them still sitting on the bed. This time they weren't tangled up in each other, weren't sharing quiet whispers. My girlfriend was sitting cross-legged on the edge of the bed, arms folded, looking almost irritated, as if she'd been waiting for me to come back and finish this. The maid sat beside her, head down, her face pale, looking anywhere but at me. But I didn't care about her anymore. My focus was on the woman I'd trusted, the woman I thought I'd known. "So this is it then," I said, my voice harsher than I'd intended, each word laced with hurt that I couldn't hide. "Everything we've built, everything I thought we were working toward, none of it mattered?" She looked up at me, a bored expression crossing her face. "Don't be so dramatic," she said, her tone almost dismissive. "People change, things end, you know that." Her calm, almost clinical response cut through me like a blade. People change, things end, as if that was supposed to be enough. "That's all you have to say?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "No explanation, no remorse. You've just moved on and I'm supposed to, what, just accept that?" She sighed, rolling her eyes like I was being unreasonable. "Look, maybe you should have seen this coming," she said, shrugging. "I mean, did you ever really ask me what I wanted? Did you ever think about the fact that maybe I wasn't as invested as you were?" My throat felt tight, my voice barely audible. "I thought we were happy. I said, almost to myself. I thought, I thought you loved me. She scoffed, her expression a mixture of pity and impatience. You were in love with the idea of us, with whatever picture you'd built up in your head, she replied, her words blunt, devoid of any hint of empathy. But that wasn't real. I tried to tell you, but you just wouldn't see it. I opened my mouth to argue, to fight back, to ask her when this had started, why she hadn't just told me if she'd felt trapped. But all I could manage was a single question, the one that had been burning in my mind since the moment I'd walked in. Why her? I asked, gesturing to the maid, who still hadn't looked up. Of all people, why her? She paused, as if considering whether I was even worth an answer. Why not? She said, her voice quiet, almost contemplative. She understands me in ways you never did. She gets it. She doesn't need me to be anything I'm not. There's comfort in that. Comfort. I felt the word settle in the air between us, a quiet insult, as if she was telling me that I had been too much, too demanding, too idealistic. The maid finally raised her head, looking at me with an expression that was impossible to read, some strange mixture of guilt and sympathy, as though she understood the weight of the betrayal, even if my girlfriend didn't. I took a deep breath, feeling the anger simmering, pushing up to the surface, but I forced it down. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. Not here, not now. You could have told me, I said, my voice hoarse. You could have been honest with me, instead of... I gestured around the room, unable to find words for what I was feeling, for the depth of the betrayal that seemed to be closing in on me. She looked away, a faint flicker of guilt crossing her face for the first time, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. Maybe I could have, she admitted, her tone softening. But I didn't think you would understand. The absurdity of her words hit me, and for a moment I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound that echoed in the room. Oh, I understand perfectly, I said, my voice laced with sarcasm. You didn't think I'd understand, so instead you let me think everything was fine while you went behind my back, in our own home, with someone I trusted. She rolled her eyes again, that same bored expression returning. Look, there's no point in dragging this out. You know the truth now. You can move on. The casual indifference of her words was the final blow. I felt something snap inside me, a sharp, painful release that left me feeling hollow and exhausted. I looked at her, this woman I had loved, this woman I had believed in, and I realized that the person I thought I knew, the person I thought I loved, was gone. Or maybe she had never been there in the first place. Fine, I said, my voice cold, steady. If that's what you want, then I'm done. You can have this, whatever this is, but don't think for a second that I'll forgive you for what you've done. For the first time, I saw a flicker of emotion cross her face, something that looked almost like surprise, maybe even regret, but it was too little, too late. The damage was done. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, my footsteps heavy as I made my way down the stairs, through the front door, and into the cool evening air. The weight of everything settled onto my shoulders as I left, a hollow ache that I knew would take a long time to fade.